What's going on, everybody? Another week, another Wednesday. Here we are. Super excited. Now, every single week when you guys submit questions, which, by the way, if you have a question, please submit it directly in the comments below. I'm always excited to see what people are curious about. And, every week there are great questions, but there's something about this week's questions that really just, I'm very eager to give my thoughts on. Now, I read them just a few minutes ago. So the way this works is I wait all week. I go through, I read the questions, I pick 5. By the way, there were more than 5 great ones. So if your question isn't used this week, please ask it again next week. And I read through them, and now I'm going to answer, or not answer, I'm going to give my opinion on my thoughts on these questions. Now, I was at a card show over the weekend, set up as a dealer with my dad. And one of the things that happened was I got to talking with a few people, some people who watched the channel stopped and said hello, which was super fun. And one person said, I really like your Q&A. You put a lot of thought, you prepare really well for your answers. And I said, actually, I don't prepare at all for my responses. And he's like, you don't kind of think about what you're going to say and prepare what you're going to say. And I say, no. And the reason is it's really, really important to me that I come across as authentic, that I seem real, that I'm not scripted, that I'm not a politician. I'm just a guy giving my thoughts. So I always read the questions and pick the questions. And then immediately, right then, few minutes later, I respond and give my thoughts. Because I don't want it to be something where I have notes and I have written stuff down. I want it to be as if we're in a room, you ask me my thoughts on something and I give you my opinion on it. And so if I just read the question and then immediately answer it, I think that it comes across in a much more authentic way. At least that's my hope. So this is not a scripted person. I'm not a scripted guy. I don't have a bunch of notes and things printed out. This is just read the question, give my thoughts. So the first question we've got where I'll share my thoughts is right here.
Do you or other content creators ever wonder or worry whether viewers start collecting what you collect simply because you guys collect it? I'm not sure if I'd be flattered or concerned if I found out people were collecting things because they liked a video I made. I feel like some people would be blaming creators if their collections went down in value. It doesn't make sense blaming other people for what is ultimately their own adult decision, but many people are that way these days. I can see this with ultra-modern cards for the obvious overproduction reasons alone, but oftentimes those type of creators also seem to encourage people to buy what they buy on their channels. You guys always preach to collect what you like, though, so I sure hope people take that advice and approach, if anything.
Man, this is absolutely an outstanding question. And it's funny that you tapped into it because it's something that I do worry about. I genuinely worry that people are going to make decisions with their money that might be affected by something that I say or I think or I collect or I like. I don't want anybody to do that. I want to be a place, I want to be a channel where we can all connect and share our own ideas. And anytime you share ideas and share thoughts and share things that you like or don't like, it absolutely could affect what other people think about things. I mean, if I'm listening to sports talk radio on the way home and somebody makes a good comment about something with the 49ers, it might affect my thoughts about the 49ers and the topic that came up. But ultimately, I'm in control of my feelings and my opinions and whether or not I'm changing my opinion or not. Somebody else is just offering up their opinion. And that's one of the reasons why when I do these Q&As, it's not really a Q&A. It's really a Q&O, right? It's a question and opinion. I'm not stating any facts here. I'm not giving any answers to any questions. What I'm doing is I am simply sharing my thoughts, my opinion. Now, Could it affect somebody's opinion? Could it turn them on to a particular set or player or way of thinking or era? Of course. But I really hope that people don't say, I'm going to change my thinking because I'm with Greg's thinking. I think all of you are much too smart to just blindly follow my thoughts and my opinions and my suggestions. You know, there are channels out there, and to me it's reckless of those channels to be making financial suggestions, and especially the names of some of their channels and the names of some of their episodes. It's as if they're giving professional advice, but in reality it's not really based on anything other than their opinion. So when somebody gives what is coming across as professional advice, but it's just opinions, and it's dealing with people's finances, right there is kind of a red flag for me. I love on YouTube listening to people share their opinions, share their collections, share their thoughts on things, having interviews with other collectors about how they got to where they are. But if somebody gets up there and says, I think this player is a good investment, or I think this set is a good investment, that to me makes me a little squeamish. Now, I have said at times that I think that there are people and players and sets and cards that are undervalued and underappreciated. That doesn't necessarily suggest that I think 10 years from now that it will be more valuable, but it could be more valuable. You know, it's just like if I'm talking with a friend and I say, hey, it really feels like the real estate market is kind of depressed right now. It seems like it might be a good time to buy. That doesn't mean that somebody should go empty their bank account, cash out their 401k, and go buy a bunch of houses because I suggested or thought, hey, maybe now is a good time to buy real estate because it seems like it might be kind of cheap. It's just simply sharing some thoughts. So that's what I try to do. I try to share my joy of the hobby, which I have so much joy of the hobby. I have so many sets that I like and so many players that I like. I do think that for whatever reason, football cards are underappreciated. I think that the football players are so much cheaper than their baseball counterparts. It's incredible. And the fact that I could get a Sammy Baugh or an Otto Graham from the early 1950s for, 10 to 20 cents on the dollar of some of the similar standout players in baseball is kind of nuts to me, especially when the supply seems to be less in football. But again, at the end of the day, I guess it's just a matter of the demand for baseball cards over football cards. But for me, I get to collect cards that I like, and I will share the cards that I like. But never at any point am I making a financial recommendation or suggestion. I'm just kind of sharing my observations. And so absolutely, it worries me because I don't want anybody to have ever come and look at this channel and watch a video on this channel and have anything other than entertainment. It's an entertainment, it's a shared passion and a shared joy of something that I think we all are really into, and it's a common place to exchange those ideas. And that's one of the reasons I'm always promoting comments down below, is it gives us an opportunity to share our ideas. But if someone in the comments says, I think baseball cards are going down to zero. It's a slow decline. Vintage cards will be worth nothing at some point soon. I totally respect that opinion. But if I sell all my cards and then cards go way up, I'm not going to go blame that person because they said they were going to go down, but they went up. Nobody here is an expert. We're just a bunch of guys sitting around sharing our opinions about something that we enjoy. And that's all we are. And I've said a million times, I don't have any professional equipment. I certainly don't have any employees. I'm just a guy who literally has his camera on top of a computer monitor right now instead of a tripod that I'm talking to, sharing my interest, my opinion, and my love of cards.
Greg, what is your general take on the banning of Kurt's cards by PSA? How will it affect our industry? Also, what is your feeling with respect to the recent purchase of JSA by CGC? I think it is a good move by CGC, as autograph authentication has become a much bigger part of our industry in the last several years. Thank you.
All right. So I really like both parts of this question, right? First, the part about Kurt's Card Care and its effects on the industry, and then about CGC and JSA. So let's start with Kurt's Card Care. I personally, Greg's opinion, think that soaking cards, that putting chemicals on cards, that using the tools that are part of Kurt's Card Care kit is out of bounds. That's not for me. And I am a traditionalist, and there's very little that gets people fired up as much as talking about grading companies and talking about card restoration, alteration. Those are two of the most polarizing things that ever come up on any card channel. And so I realize that in just saying that, it upsets a lot of people. But it's not for me. Banning it, I think, is the right decision. The problem with PSA banning it and decertifying some of those cards, is if you don't have a way to really detect it, then how effective is it to say that it's banned? Until PSA can find some sort of light technology, some sort of sensor technology, where they can determine if a card was soaked in certain substances and altered with different polishes and things, then saying it's banned is nice. I think it's good that they've done that, but I don't know how much it's gonna actually change until they actually are able to stop it and catch it consistently. Not to mention all the cards that have already been holdered that have used these things. So can they go back? Possibly. It would be very difficult to do, but it's at least nice to maybe try to stop the bleeding. And if there's a way for them to start catching it, that's where I think they should be putting their focus. Not in the PR of saying we've banned it and we've decertified these certain serial numbers. The more important part is being able to catch it moving forward. Now, again, this is a topic that, people have a variety of opinions. Great, good for them. That's mine. I think it's bad to have card cleaning, card soaking, card alterations. And I think that PSA at least claiming that they're cracking down on it, I think that's good. How will it affect the industry? I think it'll affect the industry by hopefully preventing more of these things from happening. I mean, I don't know how you don't call that fraud. If you're claiming a card isn't altered, and it's an authentic, unaltered card, and you are then submitting it to a grading company, and it's been altered, I don't know how that's not fraud. It is the intent of deceiving somebody for financial gain. I mean, isn't that almost verbatim what fraud, the definition of fraud is? So that's my take on that. Now, again, if they can't find a way to stop it, then it's just, it's just verbiage. So we'll see what happens, but I think it's a good thing if they can find a way to stop it. Now, as far as CGC and JSA, I think it's brilliant. For a long time, one of the things that was hurting SGC is that SGC didn't have authentication of autographs. They did for a minute, and then they pulled back and stopped doing that. There was just a very short window in which SGC was doing autograph authentication. And I think that if CGC wants to compete with Beckett and wants to compete with PSA with sports cards and on a massive scale, I think it's a really good move. Now, personally, if I could go back 6 months, what I wish would have happened is I wish SGC would have stayed independent from collectors and not joined forces with collectors and PSA. and as a result, they had purchased JSA or they had somehow merged. I don't even know who's bigger, but if those two had merged, then they could join forces and have been, an increasing threat to PSA's, real monopoly, actually. So I think it's a good thing. Now, CGC, the overwhelming majority of their grading that's happening is primarily coming from TCG cards. It's not so much sports cards. They are grading volumes, a huge volume of cards, but a lot of them are TCG. It's not so much sports cards. So will this help them to start to kind of wedge their way into sports cards? Hopefully. Now, so Greg, are you saying that you're all on board with CGC now? No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I'm a fan of competition. I said that from the beginning. I'm not a PSA person or an SGC person or a Beckett or a CGC. I'm not any of those. What I am is I'm a fan of competition because competition is good for the industry. It creates innovation. It lowers prices. It increases, customer service. So anytime companies join together, like PSA and SGC under the collector's umbrella, that is likely to harm innovation and harm a drop in prices for us collectors. Now, people say, oh no, they're staying separate. Okay, we'll see how this plays out, but that's my concern. So CGC acquiring an authentication company, allowing them to join forces to then be able to compete with some of the other bigger companies that do grading and autograph authentication, I think is a good thing in continuing to have competition, which is good for us. So I'm all for it. I've never sent a card to CGC. Will I? Maybe. I haven't yet, but I'm all for having more competition and them acquiring the autograph authentication makes them a more legitimate competitor with PSA and if Beckett were to get their stuff back together.
Question. I've been watching all of the Strongsville show videos. I noticed so many high-price comma cards in the display cases and watched Mike Moynihan flip a quarter with a dealer to settle between 4100s and 4500 for the Jackie card. It has me asking myself, as now you, is there a price point that I am unwilling to go for a picture of a person on cardboard? As a former coin collector, where we have a good idea of how rare or scarce a coin is, to now looking at cards that there is no reasonably accurate data for production of any individual card. It makes me question if I have a price point that would be a bridge too far for me to go. It's not a disposable income issue, as I'm fortunate enough to be able to get just about anything I currently want, within reason, in the hobby. It's what is my tolerance issue, I guess. Look forward to seeing your answer.
It's so interesting that you asked this question because I was at work about a week ago, and I was at a meeting. In fact, it was exactly a week ago, and I saw a friend at a meeting, and the friend came up and was asking me about how the Strongsville show went, and he said, at what point, what's the most you'd ever spend on a card? And he knows that I'm kind of a financially responsible, conservative financially with how I spend and how I save. I do a lot of retirement savings and I live on a pretty tight budget to make sure that I have plenty in my savings account. And so he was kind of like, how much would you spend? What's the most you would spend? And I kind of thought about it for a second and I said, I think maybe 50 or 60,000. And he was absolutely blown away. He's like, really? And I'm like, well, I don't have $50,000 or $60,000. But if I had a lot of money, I don't think I would hesitate to spend 50 or 60,000 on, a card. And the way you put it, you simplified it, and you really did, simple it down to a picture of a person playing sports on a piece of cardboard. Like someone would really pay $50,000 for a picture of somebody playing sports on a piece of cardboard? Well, my answer is yes. And my answer is yes because just look at art. An Andy Warhol painting. Let's say an Andy Warhol painting sells for $3 million. Isn't that just a canvas with some paint on it? I mean, isn't that all it is? Isn't, a Renoir or a, Michelangelo, isn't that just, isn't a Michelangelo sculpture? Isn't that just a piece of granite with some of the excess removed to create something to expose something underneath? Isn't it just a piece of rock? So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing about art. Art is in the eye of the beholder. Its value is whatever two people are willing to pay. And so, as long as there are two people willing to pay a lot for a Mickey Mantle card or a Babe Ruth or a Lou Gehrig, it's going to have value. And to me, cards are basically, art meets folk art, meets collectible, meets, sports, meets all the things that I like, all wrapped into one. And so if I had that kind of money, if $500,000 fell in my lap and I went to a show and I saw, a really nice 49 leaf Jackie Robinson and it was $50,000, I'd absolutely spend $50,000 on it. Does that make me crazy? Maybe. Some people are like, it's definitely, you're definitely crazy. Maybe. Now, I don't have to worry about this because I'm not going to have that kind of money fall in my lap. But, for me, when I went to Strongsville and I spent $2,000, like that's a huge amount of money for me in my life. So I don't anticipate ever having a situation where I would spend $50,000. Also, my wife would probably have something to say for me doing that. That said, I don't think it's necessarily an awful idea. Now, let me rewind a couple of questions to, do I worry about people taking investment advice from me and spending money on things? I'm not suggesting that everybody should go out and take $50,000 and buy a 49 leaf Jackie Robinson. I'm not suggesting that, okay? So I'm just saying, for me, if the money was not an issue and there was a card I really wanted, I don't think it's unreasonable to spend a lot of money on a card, just like I don't think it's unreasonable that people spend the kind of money that they do on, a painting from a famous artist. It's just, as long as there's demand for something by more than one person, and the demand is high enough that people will pay up for it, I think it's going to have value for a while.
Okay, Greg, here's my question. Why doesn't PSA decertify the trimmed Bruce McNall, Wayne Gretzky, Honus Wagner card? If they are decertifying cards that they are graded and later come to light that they are altered, rules are rules, right? I probably know what you're going to say, but hey, it's yet another inconsistency.
All right. Such a great question. I don't want to be a person who defends PSA, but let's just kind of walk through this a little bit. So, probably the most valuable card, or at least the most famous single card, not type of card, not like the 52 Mantle versus the, T206 Honus Wagner, but the single most individual famous card in the world is gotta be the T206 Honus Wagner with the serial number of 1 from PSA, the one that Wayne Gretzky was part owner of, that famously has sold a few times. Now, there's a few things going on here. First thing is, it was like that card was used as like a publicity stunt to really launch PSA. I mean, the famous serial number of 000001, the fact that that's the first card, the fact that that all happened as PSA is starting, and it was a publicity stunt to launch what has now become and has been for a while the biggest grading company. And so, it is sort of like the symbol of PSA. It's like the origin, the epicenter of PSA being a grading company and being a company that certifies cards is that card. Now, in case you missed it, not all that long ago, Bill Mastro pleaded guilty to trimming that card, and the card is trimmed. I mean, it's in the court documents. Under oath, he said, "Yeah, we trimmed the card." So we know now for certain that card is trimmed. Now, I think a lot of people thought it was trimmed, but it's like legally been found under oath that it was trimmed. So why doesn't PSA decertify it? Now, there's a few things. There's a few things. I'm not going to defend PSA. I'm not here to give reasons on how PSA should or shouldn't be doing whatever they're doing. But number one, PSA does have a guarantee. And the guarantee is any card that is sold that somebody else purchases that they didn't submit to PSA, but they purchased in a PSA holder, they have a guarantee that they will refund you the value of the card if they certified a card and it is later decertified. So I think one of the reasons that PSA hasn't decertified that card is because then they'd have to buy it. And we're talking about millions of dollars that they would be out if they did that. So for one, it's a very expensive thing to do. But shouldn't PSA do it? If they're claiming that every card in a PSA holder is legit, and any ones that they find out that aren't legit, they decertify, then why wouldn't they decertify it? I mean, well, besides it being an expensive decision, it also is something where I think that they would have to, by being expensive because they'd have to refund it. It's also kind of understood what it is. I mean, to a certain extent, the reason that they decertify cards from being from their certification that PSA has is so that people become aware that they found out later that card isn't what it is. But because that particular card is so noteworthily known to have been trimmed, and anybody who would be in the market of buying it would certainly find that information out easily, then by decertifying it, you're not really like sharing with the public, oh, by the way, that's trimmed. It's known. It's a known fact that it's not an authentic, unaltered card. It was altered. So again, one of the reasons that you decertify it is to protect future buyers. But since everybody knows this card and everybody knows the history of this card, nobody's going to accidentally probably wouldn't accidentally buy a card that would be that they didn't know was trimmed because it's so widely known that it was. But that's not a good excuse. I'm just trying to explain why maybe they haven't. Now, I can tell you this. If for some reason any of the administration at PSA were to ever come on my channel, which I'm pretty certain they don't even know I exist, but if for some reason a Nat Turner came on my channel, I 100% would ask that question. I 100% would say, so tell me about your authenticity guarantee. Tell me about the decertification of certain cards. Oh yeah, and by the way, why haven't you decertified that one? I would love to hear his response. I would love to hear it. And he's gone on a bunch of channels, a lot of them we've probably seen. And he's answered a variety of questions. But I've not heard him ask that question. If he's been asked that question, somebody share a link in the comments, because I'd love to see how he responded. But I would absolutely ask him that question. My guess is, if he even knew I existed, and if he was ever willing to come on my channel, I have a feeling he would probably have a few things he would say he didn't want to talk about. He would probably say something like, I'd have to refer you to my legal department when it comes to things like that, as to the decisions and how that is made. That's my guess on how he would respond. But I think it's a terrific question, and I would love to hear from Nat Turner himself what the answer is.
After your Strongsville experience, do you think shopping at a show with a group of YouTubers and documenting your purchases for YouTube had any impact on your buying decisions? Would you have made different decisions if you were by yourself and not presenting your pickups?
So this is a great question. I told you all 5 of these questions I was really excited to give my thoughts on when I read over them. And with regards to this particular one, do I think attending the Strongsville show with so many other collectors affected any of my purchase decisions? Now, I can tell you my answer is no, it didn't. I went in with a very focused list of 10 cards, and I was determined to leave the show with one of those 10. Now, I wasn't going to buy a card that didn't meet my specifications just so I could go home with one of those 10 cards. If I came home with no cards because I didn't find what I was looking for, that would have been fine. I'm thankful that I was able to find one of those 10 cards. One of the 10 cards on my list was the 33 Gaudy Rogers Hornsby Fielding. And I was able to find one in a grade and in a condition and at a price that worked for me. And I was really excited to bring that card home. I didn't even have the 49 Leaf Spawn on my list because it's so hard to find centered. I felt like there was no chance I would find that card there centered in a grade that I could afford. The fact that I stumbled into it was just sheer blind luck, and I couldn't let it go as soon as I saw it. So that wasn't even one of the 10 cards I comped, because I thought there was no chance I would find one that met my specifications. Now, I will say, however, that being around those guys did affect some of the things I looked at. Now, it didn't affect it because I'm like, well, they like that, so now I like that. I've never been that person. I've never been a person where if something was popular with others, then it became popular with me. Like, that's just not how I'm wired. If anything, I'm kind of a contrarian, and I'm like, well, if they like that, then I'm gonna like this other thing over here. I mean, heck, you're talking to a guy who collects pirate cards, right? Allen and Ginter pre-1900 pirate cards are one of the cornerstones of my collection. So that is exactly my point, in that I don't do what others are doing. If anything, I avoid what others are doing because I don't want to do what others are doing. But when you're sitting around this wealth of knowledge with these guys, and you're sitting around at the banquet room at the get-together, and you're walking around the show and you're looking at cards together, and they're pointing out things and they're talking about things, there's so much knowledge that as you are learning about these cards and as you're exposed to these new cards, I think that it's hard to not kind of take a liking to them. You know, if my whole life I only drank Coors Light. Okay. Greg, are you talking about beer all of a sudden? Yes, just hear me out. If my whole life I only drank Coors Light, but I went to a guy's weekend, and at the guy's weekend, a bunch of people brought in their favorite beers and put them in the ice chest. And we're just hanging out on the back deck, sharing stories, and we start talking about different beers that we like. And I start trying them, and they tell me about why they like it, and the tastes that they like about it, and the things that they enjoy about it. And I start trying them. There's a chance that by being exposed to this other thing that I had never really considered, because I was just a Coors Light drinker, there's a chance I might go, you know what? You're right. This pale ale is pretty darn good. I think I like this. I think it's the same sort of thing with cards. When you're around other people who have this passion for something and they share the passion with you, and then you start to spend time around the thing that they're passionate about, and you go, yeah, I totally see why they like this. If you had asked me 5 years ago about the Goodwin Champions cards, I would have said, I've seen them before. But honestly, like genuinely, watching Orlando of A Collector's Dream talk about those cards and share those cards, and the glow in his eye as he talks about them and shows them, and how excited he gets. And the more I look at them and spend time seeing them and him talk about them and show off other, athletes from the set, I'm like, yeah, I think I need to have a couple of those. Those really are incredible. Now, does that mean I want them because Orlando has them and Orlando likes them? No. But Orlando helped open my eyes to something that I didn't know was awesome until I really experienced the awesomeness through his eyes. So I totally think that sometimes there might just be something that you've not really been exposed to. And as soon as you're exposed to it by somebody and you kind of start to look at it a little bit more, you go, yeah, that's really cool. And so I definitely experienced that in Strongsville. Walking around, a good friend of mine is really into those 1928 ice cream cards. 3 months ago, I was just like, yeah, I've seen them. They're cool. They're black and white, But in conversing with a good friend of mine who just has a passion for them, I'm like, yeah, they're pretty cool. And now I have, I have that Roger Peckinpah in my collection, and they're pretty cool. And I never would have thought that 6 months ago. But the more that you learn about something and the more you're exposed to it, the more likely you are to potentially also kind of like it. It's like if you're visiting a friend in a different state and you're driving around, you're like, this town's pretty cool. This area is pretty cool. This neighborhood's pretty cool. Maybe I want to move here. Maybe I like this place more than where I live. That doesn't mean you're buying in that new area just because of that person, but they exposed you to something that you previously didn't really have experience with and maybe opened your eyes to it. So do I think that my purchases were affected by anybody? No. But do I think that they maybe opened my eyes to some things that I previously hadn't really given a good look to? Absolutely. And that was one of the funnest parts of the show. So, 5 great questions. I really, really enjoyed talking about those. If you have a question for an upcoming episode, or if you asked a question last week and I didn't cover it this week, please ask it down below in the comments. You don't have to do anything except just simply ask the question. And I look forward to hearing what you all want to hear of me share my thoughts about. Not my financial advice, not my, wealth planning advice, but just simply my opinion on those topics next week.